You are listening to the Small Town Big Arts podcast. I'm your host, Jeffrey Kirshner, the CEO of the Academy Center of the Arts in Lynchburg, Virginia. In my own work as an arts leader, I have found it difficult to access resources for arts organizations and artists serving smaller communities. On each episode, Small Town Big Arts sets out to drive conversations and provide inspiration for those serving smaller communities through the arts. If you like what you hear, please rate and review us and share with your friends and colleagues who are working to promote the arts in smaller communities across America. You can also learn more by visiting us at smalltownbigarts.com. So on the Small Town Big Arts podcast, we've had the opportunity to interview a number of individuals involved in organizations across the United States, from the East Coast in Rhode Island to the West Coast of Alaska to the mountains of Kentucky. Today, I'm very excited to interview a group of artists and organizers involved in Border Arts Corridor, which is in a border community in Arizona. A bit about Border Arts Corridor, or also known as BAC, was founded in 2015 as an arts organization located in Douglas, Arizona. BAC recognized a need for an arts organization dedicated to telling the narrative of those who create art within a border community. While there are organizations who seek to highlight border arts with larger artists, they want to facilitate the sharing of two community stories and experiences. Since their founding, they have prioritized serving the dual communities of Douglas, Arizona, and Agua, Prieta, Sonora. They do so by creating art installations, workshops, and programming for individuals on both sides of the border. In 2018, they acquired the 501c3 designation from the Douglas Arts and Humanities Association. A quote from their website: "We see the border between Douglas, Arizona, and Agua Prieta as an opportunity to create art that transcends boundaries and unites communities. We work to drive forward social justice policies, public art, and local artists who shine a light on the communities in which they live." We are very blessed today to have to be joined by BAC's founder and board president, Janae Sanchez. She is a fellow of the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture Leadership Institute. Her work has been exhibited at the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art, the University of Arizona Art Museum, the Latino Museum of History, Art, and Culture, and the U.S.-Mexico border fence. A native of Douglas, Arizona, and Agua Prieta, Sonora, she received her MFA from Arizona State University in 2011 before returning to Douglas to pursue her career as an artist and educator. In 2015, she and her husband co-founded Border Arts Corridor. We are also joined by BAC's artistic director, Martina Rendon. She is an artist and Agua Prieta native living in Douglas, Arizona. Her work focuses on realistic scenes in the Arizona and Sonora region. She's an active member of Casa de la Cultura in Agua Prieta, Sonora, and serves on the City of Douglas's Arts and Culture Committee. She has assisted both Douglas and Agua Prieta governments, as well as artists and organizations, in implementing binational cultural and arts events on the U.S.-Mexico border. So thank you all so much for joining me today. I really am very much looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for that beautiful introduction.
Absolutely. So what I'd love to start with is to talk a little bit about the founding of the organization, because we're speaking to individuals who are in smaller communities, some of whom may be looking to start a nonprofit organization to serve arts and cultural needs within their community. And you all took another nonprofit organization's 501c3 and have taken it on as your own instead of founding it. So I'd love to know a little bit about the history of how that came about. And obviously you've returned home as well, or are home doing work, which really speaks to me. I also am a boomerang. I'm back in my own home community doing work. So I'd love to hear about the genesis and the founding of the organization.
Sure, I can start. So as you mentioned,
Janae speaking to us first.
Janae, my husband Robert Uribe and I guess you can say, returned home. I'm from Douglas originally. I met my husband in Phoenix, and he's originally from the Dominican Republic, grew up in New York. So we found each other in Phoenix while I was completing my MFA, and life took us back to the border. And I would say within the year of returning, we started a coffee shop. We opened a coffee shop in downtown Douglas. And I had just completed an MFA and was involved in every like art club and curating exhibitions and you name it. As a grad student, you're just in every like scenes possible. You have that energy. And so coming back home, it was like, oh my gosh, like I think there needs to be a space or a hub where we can just put art on the wall and maybe invite folks and talk about
Mm.
it. And so
Yeah.
that's how it started, was just monthly art exhibitions. We invited friends from the college. There's a community college in Douglas. So some of the art teachers there. And then slowly we began learning that there is really a robust binational artist community. And our coffee shop, which was called Galeano's Cafe, named after our son, became a space where not only art was being talked about and exhibited, but ideas about what it means to be a creative community in a border city that has almost no arts opportunities or funding. Like, what does that mean? And so it gained traction, from like open mic nights. We would pack this small coffee shop. The windows would be completely fogged. There's just so many people inside of this building just wanting to experience art or wanting to share art. So we'd
Yeah.
have like
I love that.
30 people show up just to perform, but there'd be about 100 people packed inside of the cafe. So eventually we decided, let's take this out into the street and let's make an art walk and expand it and invite people to set up a table and show their artwork, and like completely free. And so just naturally, we made a logo. We called it Art Walk on G, and we were posting on social media. And some of our friends who were in Phoenix and connected to our state arts agency got wind of what we were doing, and they came down and we started to develop relationships with the Arizona Commission on the Arts.
Mm.
And so when that happened, they were developing a program called AZ Art Worker. And so the idea was to, bring in some funding and resources and, this peer-to-peer mentorship opportunity into a small community like ours. And from there, we grew from like an art walk into more of like a producing and even service organization without really knowing that we were doing that.
Huh.
And I always say you go to grad school, you go to like art school, really to make relationships. And I was really lucky to develop some relationships with amazing artists that are working internationally. And one of the groups of people, their collective Post Commodity is a Native American arts collective. And right now at this moment, it's made up of two gentlemen, Kate Twist and Cristobal Martinez, um, and Raven Chacon. And they came to Douglas because they were scouting a place to install their repellent fence project, which was like the largest land art installation ever in the world. And they wanted it to cross the border. So it was these 10 foot in diameter balloons
Oh,
and
wow.
with iconography of a scare eye. So these scare eye balloons just floating across the border. And because I went to grad school with Kate Twist, he called me and said, okay, we have this like organization, or we have this group of people coming together and showing art. And so that moment when Kate asked us to facilitate the repellent fence project was when we really started like pulling in more collaborators. And that's when we met Martina, um, who has been completely instrumental to pushing back into a sphere that really truly makes us a binational arts organization, because she has been really the anchor in Agua Prieta as far as bringing together artists and cultural practitioners around one common goal, right? Which was like amplifying border narratives and border artists. And so between Martina and I and other organizers in the community, we facilitated this massive land art installation, which turned into a week's long worth of activities and the first binational art walk, which Bach, took the lead on. And that is really like how we grew from art shows into this organization straddling the border.
So Martina, so you are on the Mexican side of the border. Is that correct?
I'm on the U.S. side. I was born in Prieta, yes, but I live in Douglas.
Okay, so for our audiences who may not understand what it is to live in a border community, share with us a little, because I think what's so fascinating and really exciting about speaking with you all today is this artwork that is happening across an international border. And I imagine there are a lot of both opportunities and obstacles that come with that. So explain a little bit, how fluid is that border? How difficult is it to connect across the border? How is that, you're taking on a big project, that's moving over the border. I'm sure there's also legalities with something that's literally existing on both sides of the border. So I'd love to speak a little bit for our audience, imagining that they don't know anything about what it is to live in a border community, what that looks like.
It is so exciting to live on a binational community. Actually, I have to tell you that I have to cross 2, 3, 4 times a day.
Okay.
Because of my family, different things. My kids went to school in Agua Prieta, and then I moved into Douglas. And it is very interesting. Once you cross the border, it's a very different scenario. The smell, the cars, the people, a lot of movement on the Mexican side, because Agua Prieta is bigger than Douglas. And the experience is so different. You just get a lot of emotions once you cross. It's been a little bit difficult to create all these connections between both cities and the government's border patrol, because when we have a binational very close to the border fence, we have to talk to the officials at the border patrol base and make sure they agree and we have the correct place to do it. But you have to be here to understand exactly what it is. Nobody knows what it is to live at the border unless you've been here. So my job usually is facilitate the artist job to make sure they do all their exhibition. It doesn't matter if it's music, paints, installations, to make sure they work freely. And luckily, always when we go to Border Patrol, we always get people who understand what we do and what the artists do, and that's very good for us. We through all these years, we have created a lot of connections with different with the governments, like I said, Border Patrol, other organizations, institutions. Sometimes they come to us in order to work at the border on one side, the other side, or on both sides.
Oh, interesting. So you ended up becoming a facilitator in many ways for artists that are wanting to work on both sides.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
That's great. So also, sorry, Martina. No, I was just going to ask really quickly about the working with the Border Patrol, because one of the things that is a common theme that comes up when we speak to different organizations is obviously there is government negotiation and navigation that has to happen, usually on the local, sometimes the state level. Obviously, hearing about the Arizona Commission or Council for the Arts, right? Obviously they're engaged in some way, but it's so interesting, right? You have to navigate the border patrol, right? You have to have relationships and friendships, right? I'm sure that are established in order to navigate the work that you do, correct?
Yes, and we have the right to work there.
Yeah.
60 feet north side of the border fence.
Oh, okay.
We have to leave enough space for their cars to go and come in case they have an emergency.
Oh,
so
wow.
we have to be very careful about that, and also because they have this wire rolled along the fence. They said they just want us to be safe. And that's what we do. We look for the specific place, make sure everything is clean, because we usually do our events, especially on the US side, just where there are a lot of bushes and trees. We just clean the space and make sure everyone there is safe. So we just have to follow the rules.
So Agua Prieta is larger, you said, than Douglas?
Yeah, they have around 100,000 people.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure about Douglas, Jenny. Maybe you know.
Yeah, Douglas is about 17,000.
Yeah.
It's really small. And I want to just clarify that my husband and I recently moved outside of Douglas, so we're closer to the Phoenix area, but my mom's still there, my family, and I really
You're still
feel
serving that
like I have.
community. It still counts. It still
Absolutely,
counts.
absolutely.
Well, I asked that too, because I think it's so interesting. We think about, we have had discussions, for instance, we spoke to an organization in Wisconsin, Worm Farm Institute, and they have a very close relationship to artist communities in Madison, Wisconsin, as well as Chicago, Illinois. And so although their locale is a very small community, they end up outsourcing a lot of artistic work or artistic workers, right? Who bring their work into that Wisconsin community. So it is interesting, this notion of this larger community in Mexico that is facilitating and collaborating with this smaller community on the other side of the border. So that's such a fascinating. So on the Mexican side, I certainly see, right, for the American side, for BAC having a nonprofit status, the ability to get grant funding, to raise funds and dollars is obviously important in regards to how American funding, for better or worse, operates. In Mexico, are there funding mechanisms that are also influencing or benefiting the work that are formalized on the Mexican side of the border?
That's a good question.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say that, most of our work, I would say 90% of our work is collaborative, whether we're collaborating with other local nonprofits, collectives, artists, right, or other like academic institutions. So we're always, especially in Mexico, we have a partner, whether it's the government, like the city of Agua Prieta, or a school. So their resources definitely benefit, just by them dedicating a staff member or connecting us with artists. I feel like they benefit, or Agua Prieta benefits. But most of the funding from our work, which is usually distributed on both sides of the border, because that is just who we are. It's like, we couldn't say we're only going to pay American artists, then we wouldn't be an organization. So it's just inherent to our process and who we are and our values as an organization. Funding mostly from the US is shared throughout the border. And, if you think about it, if you pay a Mexican artist, a good percentage of that is going to come back to our community and vice versa.
Right. It's so fluid, right? So it doesn't, yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, in your description, right? It probably is somewhat, obviously there's just rules and regulations in an international border, but the way that people are intersecting, it's very fluid. And so that makes a lot of sense in that regard. So funding support on the Mexican side is more organic, it's more in kind. it's
Exactly.
sourcing of artists, and then the infrastructure of the nonprofit organization on the other side is helping facilitate the work.
Yes.
Another question again, just to ask about the nonprofit side of this really quickly. The original organization, the Douglas, what was it? The Douglas Council, the Douglas
Douglas Arts and Humanities Association.
Yes. So tell me a bit, what was that prior
Yeah.
to becoming BAC?
Sure. So there's a theater. It all revolves around this theater in
Got
Douglas,
it.
the Grand Theater.
Yes.
And so it was the sort of the center point of culture in the early 1900s between San Antonio and California. So it was really a big deal. This theater, well, housed like vaudeville and many productions, and it was central to the community. It was where high school graduations took place, and big parties and events. So it closed in 1958, and the owner pretty much abandoned the upkeep of it, and the gutters became clogged, and rainwater sat there for decades. And so eventually the roof rotted and collapsed. And so a group was formed to restore the Grand Theater in the 80s. So this has been an ongoing desire of the community to restore the Grand Theater. And it's really been passed on, like, every few years it's passed on to different people who get tired.
I just want to share really quick, Janae, that this mirrors very closely the story of my own organization here in Virginia. Our historic theater closed in 1958. It changed hands decade after decade after decade. And very, very similar story. Was a major vaudeville stop between Charlotte, North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. And so really, it's so interesting to hear this part of it. But I will for our listeners who our previous two podcasts were the story of how the theater finally happened. Which took decades and decades and decades to occur. So just interjecting that really quickly because it's an interesting reference point. So getting back to the theater. So I'm guessing that the original nonprofit organization was associated with the theater.
Yep. Yeah, it was really formed around restoring the theater, and it was actually, I looked it up. It was 1972 actually. So, in the 80s is when they completely took down the roof, and we didn't know. I just have to say that this theater is so stunning. The architecture is brilliant, and there were really two generations in our community who never stepped inside. So the last people are now like in their 80s, right? Who experienced it as a movie theater before it closed in 1958. My mother was born that year, so she never stepped inside. I never stepped inside until we acquired it.
So familiar to the story. Yeah.
So there's this desire and curiosity, and so when the former board members of the Douglas Arts and Humanities Association found out that we were organizing and writing grants, and we asked them to be our fiscal sponsor. Not even imagining that we would ever be a part of their organization or there would ever be any overlap.
You see it in umbrella.
Yeah, we saw like, oh, there's an arts organization. Like we had no idea. So they were our fiscal sponsor for one grant. And then once we got that grant, they asked, hey, do you want our 501c3? It was really a conversation like that. Like, what?
I love that. So like on lots of levels. It's tragic and comic at the same time. But that's yes.
Like I said, there has been so many incredible people in Douglas. One gentleman, Bruce Andrews, at the time he was on the board, and he put in just like millions of dollars of sweat equity into that building and restoring it, and restored the stage and all the cement work and really cleaned out all the debris. And like I said, he was tired, and so were the other board members. And he saw this group of folks, like multi-generational, where we're like in our 20s, 30s, and 40s, and we really get along and make moves, we're making things happen at the time. And they said, these people are doing things, let's pass it over. And that's really the story. They saw
You're doers. Yeah,
stuff
you were doers, and they were like,
happening.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's so I want to get to, and I think before the podcast is done, we'll touch back on the theater, because I know that the story continues there. But what I really would like to focus on, though, with you all is really the work that you do, because I think at the heart of any organization, right, is the mission, is the delivery. Facilities are facilities. I mean, they're a vessel for the work to happen, but they're not the work itself. So I do want to touch on it, but before we do, I want to get into the work that you do. One of the things, and you mentioned this earlier, and I think it's really the case and so true, is at the heart of what you do, and I think what makes you all such a fantastic organization is collaboration. And the beauty of this collaboration, also literally, transcending borders. It's really amazing. I wanted you all to speak a little bit, and maybe Martina can start, or however you all want to take this, but I want to talk about the Binational Artists Ensemble that presented a community performance at the border. There were so many organizations and individual artists involved. Project partners were you all, Rising Youth Theater, there were dance groups, there was there's just a number of dance groups. So speak a little bit about that project, because I think that might be a really great story to share in regards to kind of understanding how the work works.
Well, the Binational Art Walk is an annual event. We had to stop about 2 years because of the pandemic. This time we're gonna have it on April the 21st in Douglas, the 22nd in Agua Prieta. And what we do depends on the resources we have. We hired different number of artists on both sides. This time we have 2 in Douglas and 1 in Agua Prieta. We invite different performers and artists, visual artists, to participate, but the event is focused on those artists we hired for that specific date. We collaborate with both cities, Mexican consulate, some organizations who support us with staff or materials we need. On the Mexican side, it's usually just crossing the border. We have a specific place there. They close the avenue, and they work on a big stage for us, and just work there. The artists, they have an art exhibition on the sidewalk. It is a very emotional event. This time in Douglas, we will have the event on the Castro Park. Usually we do it on the street, but this time it's going to be on a park, because we have different installations there. We invite people from out town. Sometimes I know Janae has a lot of contacts in Phoenix, so we have a lot of artists coming from that area. Bisbee, which is a very artistic town also. In Agua Prieta, we have a lot of institutions where they teach arts, so we bring people from there too. And it is very emotional, because you can see artists coming from Agua Prieta to see the event in Douglas, and Douglas people go to Mexico to see the event there. This is the first time we want to do it in 2 days because of that, because if we have only 1 day, they don't have time to cross and see the event on the other side. So we're going to see how it works this time.
That's great.
I know it is going to be, I think it's going to be better this way.
Yeah, that's exchange moving in both directions. I bet will make that even more dynamic and moving in lots of regards. Just to go back on technicalities of it again too, and practicalities, I guess I should say. What are the legal obstacles border crossing? You mentioned 60 feet. Is that extended for the day? How does that work so that everybody can fluidly move back and forth?
Well, that's only when we have an event at the border fence.
Okay.
When we need those 60 feet away from the fence, but because this time is on the street in Agua Prieta and the park in Douglas, we don't have any problem. If you cross, you just need to have your ID or driver's license to come into the U.S. again. We don't have any problem at all during this event. When we have only if we need to cross some kind of equipment into Mexico, maybe we have a U.S. artist who wants to participate on the Mexican side and wants to bring his own equipment. Then we have to find out exactly what the Mexican customs restrictions are.
Oh wow! Okay.
That's the only,
Then you just pay a fee based on the price.
Does the organization, does BAC handle that fee? Is that how that works?
Yeah, we've handled it. It just depends on like who's funding, and that's usually just calculated into our budget if needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say for most nonprofit arts organization leaders, knowing budgets, that would be a unique one, that right, that there's a customs, that you have to, there's a fee. So that's really unique, right? We all have, wherever we are, right, there are very specific costs of the work that we do. So
and if we don't have to if we have to keep our money for other things, what we do sometimes, we go to the Mexican Agua Prieta's mayor, and if we need to cross something very expensive, he goes to the Mexican customs director, and they talks, and he let us cross things for free. So we have to handle things in a different way in order to save money and use that money to pay artists or something else.
And that's something you all are very dedicated to, correct? Is the artists are paid, right? And that is I noticed that as a theme that runs throughout the value of the artists, the importance of the artists being compensated, and I think that's extraordinarily honorable. In that regard, maybe we could speak a little bit too about the BAC fellowship, and I know that there's some residency components to what you all do. Maybe we could speak a little bit about that as well.
Sure. Where we started the Bach Fellowship 2 years ago through a grant called Changing the Border Narrative, and this was a Ford Foundation and NALAC funding. NALAC is the National Association for Latino Arts and Cultures. So Ford Foundation and NALAC, they provided this opportunity to border organizations across the region. So Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, and we were a recipient. And this was our largest grant we've ever received. And it was amazing to be able to say, okay, artist, here's like $4,000, make a project.
Yeah, go for it.
And do your thing, and then we'll celebrate at the end. And the fellowship is really about appreciating what we're already doing, right? What artists are already doing is, we're telling our own stories and through our mediums, through our eyes. And the fellowship also appreciates the fact that we don't know everything. So there's a research component. So if an artist is interested in learning more about, let's say, migration or the history of the borderlands, which is never taught to us, right? So we bring in experts in the field and provide like learning sessions for each fellow, which is a public event. Because of COVID, it was all Zoom. And then another component is the artists. We ask that they teach a workshop, a skills workshop. So last year we had a few dancers, we had a fashion designer, we had a photographer, videographer, 2D artist. And so there were these workshops happening on both sides, painting workshops, sewing workshops, dance workshops that were free for the community. And then finally, we asked that they present the work publicly. So that's where the Binational Art Walk, really comes in. And we really try to highlight their pieces, their new work on both sides of the border. So the first year we funded 6 artists, 3 on each side. And this year we're funding 3. We're hoping to find more funding so we can continue to grow. And so, yeah, that's pretty much what's
That's great.
happening. Yeah.
Just to touch on this really quickly too, one of the things that I'm really struck by, right, is the border is a man-made, thing, and it's, governments are real, and obviously these borders have significant impact on our lives, and they mean a ton, but ultimately at the end of the day, right, the history is very fluid, and
Right.
how these borders came about is
Absolutely.
complicated. I was really struck by you just saying just a moment ago that you're not taught much of the history of that border. So the other thing, one of the themes that comes up quite a bit is how success of arts organizations in smaller communities very often is really connecting to the identity of the community in a really clear way, and providing real value. And sometimes that value comes through connecting to the history of a place.
Right.
And so that's really interesting also, that the ability to connect to people in regards to telling a story that hasn't been told. I mean, what a fantastic value that is. And I have to imagine for participants on both sides of the border, that has to be extraordinarily rewarding and valuable on lots of levels.
Yeah, we hope so. Everybody wants their story to be articulated in a way that is true, to who they are and who the community is. So, when we talk about the history of the land in that community, if you think about whatever 10,000 years, right, the border structure, or even the idea of the border, is like a piece of hair in that timeline. Right? So when you find ways to tell that story, and then all the craziness that happens in between, it's so beautiful and it's so complex, and it's not black and white, which is how it's usually represented. And there's so much color and drama and simplicity even, right, in that story. So that's what we really value. We really value that opportunity to work with artists to do this work.
Yeah. I'm so moved by this too. I think about, here on the East Coast in Virginia, our borders are with other states. So, there's obviously identities that come with what state you're in, but it's pretty fluid. And I think about, I have a 5-year-old son, and I think about, he looks at a map and he sees the borders, right? And it's like, this is this country, this is that country. But obviously, right, it's not, right, it's never that simple. And it's certainly not as simple as the stories that we're told either in national media, right, about what is sort of happening. So it's one of the beauties of what art can do in regards to shining a light on the complexity of what is happening. I want to touch on some of the sort of nonprofit nuts and bolts stuff for the purposes of our audience. So, the organizations that I've spoken to, there's a wide range of the way that organizations set up their boards, how they operate. I'm actually, from speaking with you both, I'm not super surprised to hear that you are in both directions, that you're focused on the artist and paying the artist, due to the fact that the board is, from my own research, and correct me if I'm wrong if this isn't the case still, but appears to largely be artists. It's an artist board, correct?
Yes, for the most part, yes.
For the most part. So I want to get to the part that's not the most part, but let's start with the most part. So for the most part, why because many organizations, right, and there's arguments to both sides of this, right? There's sometimes about supplying a board for an organization that's going to provide kind of infrastructure and sort of supply skill sets for the organization that the artists or the staff don't have, right? And kind of fill the void in regards to different strategies the organization may be taking on. So you all have chosen, and I think it's great, I will say, but it's largely artists. So speak to that a little bit, what that does for you all and what that means.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started the board, it's changed over the years, and we have 4 board members at the moment. And I just want to say that yes, we are all artists, but our identities go beyond like our work as artists. So we have a literary artist who's also a librarian, right?
Yeah.
So I'm an artist, but I'm also a communications director for an organization, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Bibi, she's an artist, she's a choreographer, but she's an entrepreneur too. So we can pull from the strengths of each person, and everybody has different strengths, but ultimately I think it's really important that we have the same values and I guess goals for the organization. Not that a lawyer or an accountant wouldn't bring so much value. I think they would. We just haven't maybe put it out there enough. So we're growing, and our goal is to diversify our board eventually, and also have representation from Mexico as well. So that is sort of in our
Interesting.
Yeah, we have that as a goal for this coming year.
Do you know what I mean? This is because, again, nuts and bolts are what are the, because I really don't know what's the legality in having a non-US citizen on a US nonprofit board.
So like everything, it's complicated.
Yeah.
But I want to say that if a person is from Mexico, living in Mexico, they might also have legal status in the US,
Got
right?
it. Okay.
So there's just a combination of everything in between, whether a person is living in the US but is a Mexican national. So that is something we're learning at the moment and navigating. So we don't have the exact formula, but we know we can make it work because every project has this like roadmap that is not straight. We want to get from A to B, but say boom, boom, boom. And I think that's our strength as a board, is navigating all of the bureaucracy of border life in a way that is fluid, and we make it work. It's
Yeah. I think that's the beauty of this conversation, is you make it work. You make it work. Well, and it's clear, right? I will say, right, the makeup of the board, clearly, if you were doing so much and sourcing so much from the Mexican side of the border, then it makes a ton of sense that you want that. You want that participation. You want them there.
Right.
Just out of curiosity. Sorry, go ahead.
Martina is from Mexico. She lived most of her life in Mexico and now lives in the US. So like I mentioned, she's like our anchor, and her relationships run so deep in Agua Prieta, like a few generations. And not only with her connections to the cultural community, but also the political community. So that has really been such an asset for us getting things done that are complicated.
Yeah, you'd have to have, right? I mean, so that's big. So out of curiosity, you could say most were artists. So there's a 4th person out there. What is their skill set? What are they bringing? What's their background?
So let's see, Vivi, me. Dara is our 4th board member, and she is a teacher. So she just finished her BFA, and she's a practicing artist, but now she's a teacher. So
but also an artist. So in the end, that's great.
But also an artist. Yeah.
Well, I think I will say for our listeners, I think that when we think about making a board and putting a board together, you bring up an excellent point in that it tends to be, right, that most artists, right, have dual utility, right? I find we have, we have a full-time staff, and many of that full-time staff are artists in their own right, but then they're doing, our CFO is a ceramic artist, right?
Okay.
She's an accountant, but does accounting, but also
I love
works
it.
with clay. So I mean, I think that this is a thing to be remembered, I think, for particularly organizations and smaller communities looking to source a board and put a board together. And bottom line, one of the things that's most important is that the people that are on the board are deeply committed to the mission of the organization and understand why the organization's mission is important. And you can have, to your point, right, Janae, you can have a lawyer, you can have somebody, but if they're not invested in who and what you are, it doesn't really matter that much.
Right.
I mean, they may be able to help you a little bit, but is it really a board seat that you want to give up when you might be able to get that help without them sitting on the board? So,
Right.
so as we're sort of coming to the end, I do want to circle back around on the theater, because I think that the theater poses an interesting topic for conversation, in regards to its status and where things are, but I think also in just talking a little bit about buildings and spaces. So I have the last two podcasts on Small Town Big Arts were focused on the completion and restoration of our very large multi-million-dollar restoration project on a theater, and it took a huge amount to get it done, and it got done.
Congratulations.
Thank
Nice.
you. But what also comes with that, I have a lot of conversations with a colleague of mine in Roanoke, Virginia, who has a building that is 25 years old now, and it's beginning to fall apart. And at some point, I'm going to bring Cyrus onto the podcast, and we're going to talk about this, the pressures that nonprofit organizations also have with facilities. Like, everybody wants a facility, everybody wants a building, but then when you get that building can end up pulling a large amount of resources, time, energy that could be spent on the work. So
Exactly.
I before we get into the story of the theater, I want to bring that up, because I think buildings are double-edged swords. And so I have, in previous conversations, I point anybody on the podcast to the story of Sitka, Alaska. They use their facilities, upgrades and overhauls to galvanize the community, have be a focus point for them to sort of get connected to the organization and move it forward. So it can be helpful. And so I don't want to say, like, don't get a building, but tell me a little bit about where the building is right now, the status of it. I know that you all are not with it anymore. So tell me a little bit about that, and then maybe we can talk about the good and the bad in that. Maybe.
Okay, I'll start, and then maybe Martina can finish off. So the status of the building is that it's still closed. We don't have the permits set for public to go in. But I want to emphasize that since we've acquired it in 2018, we've organized maybe a dozen events around the building. So whether we're doing projections on the side of the building, or animating the foyer, and we have two storefronts. One of them is Bach Gallery, and our fellows get to activate the space during the duration of the fellowship. And then we call it the music room, which used to be the candy store, and that's also a space being activated. So we do as much as we can. Literally, the basement is currently being activated by our fashion design fellow.
That's right.
We do what we can. We can't wait for the day where the public can go into the auditorium, right, and imagine what it was like, but also experience the open air. It's a beautiful, eerie feeling to be there. And so there are trees inside of there. There's some wildlife. We have an owl family that has made their nesting space.
Is there a roof on it currently, or it's just open air?
It's open air. So the front, the lobby is closed, but the auditorium is open air. And that was our desires, to keep it that way, is to restore it enough to open it and have open air events.
That's super cool. That's super cool.
It is cool.
We have the gallery. The gallery is a small room on one of the corners, and I'm talking about it because I was there last weekend, because we have a learning session for one of our fellows for this year. And we had the opportunity to get into the rest of the building, and it is just falling apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is really sad, because it is beautiful. It is beautiful. When you are outside, you cannot imagine what is inside. We went to the music room, and the everywhere, and yeah, and the owl was there.
Yeah.
So,
So I guess long story short,
yeah.
what you mentioned that we're no longer like the full owners of the building anymore. Last year, an investor came to town and purchased about 8 buildings in town.
Mm.
And one of them being the Gadsden Hotel, which is, I would say, besides the Grand Theater, I would say the Gadsden is like the heart of the community, architecturally, culturally. It's really the centerpiece of Douglas. And then there's the Grand Theater, but it's not open, so it doesn't have the same impact. So this person bought the Gadsden and multiple buildings, and they had a huge desire to purchase the Grand Theater, and we were like, no thanks, like we're not selling it. We just couldn't imagine this giving up this cultural piece of history
Well, and
and
to a private developer too, right?
to a private developer.
Yeah.
And so over the year, we got to know this person. Politicians got involved in our community, and there was some, I would say, pressure for us to sell. And so we worked with a nonprofit lawyer. We hired a nonprofit lawyer who actually did a lot of it pro bono, but we came up with a contract that, we're able to keep a percentage of ownership in perpetuity. And that is through 50 days of programming a
Oh,
year of the building.
okay.
So no matter who owns the building, Bach or whoever we designate this contract to, will have full access to the building in perpetuity for programming. So that was part of the contract, in addition to, continued access of the storefronts, also access to house artists for residencies and another building that this person owned. We just found out, well, recently the investor sold the Gadsden, is not following through with the vision that was sold to us, not only by him, but by people in the community. And there are a lot of very disappointed, mad constituents, not, I think, at the situation, right?
Yeah, understandable.
So that's what's happening. And hopefully next time we talk, we'll have an update.
We're gonna have to do a follow-up. I think it's to begin. Actually, I also want to say really quick, I keep saying BAC, and you all have been saying talk, and so I'm sorry that I have been doing that. But I hearing that story, one, I think it's really smart, and for our listeners to hear how that contract was arranged, to tie the activity of the nonprofit to the building, no matter the owner, I think was really savvy and really smart. And I think if you're in a community, and very often communities have these performance spaces that are no longer in use, and I think not all developers are are bad guys, but
No.
but sometimes their understanding of what it takes to run a cultural institution is very limited and somewhat patronizing, I find sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important to remember that even if the leverage and the money is with the developer, that you do have power in the fact that you are the bringer of the culture, you are the supplier of the artists and the life that makes the building come alive. So I think using that as leverage is really really smart. And it will be interesting to see where this goes. I think that these projects are difficult. I will say also, I think it is brilliant, this notion of embracing the circumstances of the roof with the space,
Right.
because I think in some ways you could have a place that is, there are a lot of restored historic theaters, in America. There's a lot of them. But to have something that is both the past and the present and the future sort of all rolled up into one is really awesome. And I'm guessing the weather in southern Arizona there probably is open air is probably a benefit, correct?
Yeah, many days, many months out of the year, absolutely. And another thing about the investor, we had plans to have garden space, native plants, and moving water through the space in a strategic way. There's a Borderlands Restoration Network where, we had some plans, and they were all about it and didn't want to change our plans, just wanted to restore it, wanted to actually put in the money to make it all happen.
Yeah.
So we were really like, okay, like the vision aligned.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
There were good intentions behind it. It just, things changed and fell apart, and we're hoping one day we can get it back and have full control and ownership, because we're learning that there are resources out there that we didn't know about before. So
yeah. Well, and I think these things are these stories have multiple chapters, and I think if you are continuing, you all ended up on my radar for this because your work is making a difference, and it's valuable to the communities you serve, and it's unique and it's powerful. And if you keep doing that, right, and step by step, more and more doors open up in front of you. So I remain as an outsider. I mean, granted, I'm not there, but I remain as an outsider pretty optimistic for you all in that space, however it manifests itself. But this has just been wonderful. I always close out. I ask guests, and so I'll ask each of you if you had some advice to share with a individual or group of individuals trying to run a nonprofit arts organization in a small community, and looking at your own successes, what advice might you give them? And either of you can start.
I would say just think that you have to share your time, your free time. It is the most difficult time when you work for a nonprofit. That's why it is hard to find people to join. But yeah, share your time, do it with your heart, and think that once you are there, you're gonna work for other people, for art in this case, and just do your best.
That's great.
I love that, Martina. I have two things. I would say surround yourself with people you enjoy spending a lot of time with and figuring out difficult problems with. So it doesn't have to be your friends, right? But people that you can vibe with and to navigate, issues and complexities to make things happen. And then secondly, I would say pay artists. If you have a budget, make sure that a good portion is going to pay not only staff, of course, like compensate folks for doing cultural work. We started off never paying anybody, never paying staff, never paying artists. And once we learned about the world of funding and philanthropy and arts funding, then, we were fortunate enough to be mentored by other people in organizations who had that value like front and center, and we adopted it as well. And so with this shift, I think it has the power to shift the mindset of the value of the arts community, the value of culture, and artists in the future will live, possibly have living wages working as artists. And that's like the goal, right? Because what are we without art?
Yep. Yep. And that value, putting value on that, translates back out to the community, right? And
Right.
that's huge, and it becomes a loop, and it feeds itself. So this has been absolutely wonderful. I would encourage listeners, Border Arts Corridor's website is bacaz.org. Again, that's bacaz.org. If you are traveling in Arizona, I would or Mexico for that matter,
Right.
I would strongly encourage you to check them out and check out their work. This has been Janae and Martina. This has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, and I look forward to hearing the continuation of the story too, in the days, weeks, and years ahead.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Small Town Big Arts. Remember to rate and review us and share with your friends. To learn more, visit us at smalltownbigarts.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Jeffrey Kirshner.